Welcome to this session. In this session, we will discuss abhava or non-existence as the seventh category of Vaisesika philosophy. As you know that Vaisesika system was propounded by Kanada. Then after Kanada, there are many development happen in Vaisesika philosophy. So in toto, there are many scholars contribute their opinion, their intellectual resources for the development of this system. Kanada said there are 6 categories of padarthas. In later period, Sivaditya is another thinker or scholar in Vaisesika philosophy. He added another category in the list of 6 categories. So therefore, we find 7 categories in Vaisesika philosophy. The 7 categories are Dravya, Guna, Action, Samanya, Samavaya, Vishesha and Abhava. The last category, Abhava or non-existence, is added by Sivaditya in the later period. But the first 6 categories are mentioned by Kanada. We have already discussed all the 6 categories which are having positive in character or positive in nature. The last category remains, and it is also an equally important category of Vaisesika philosophy. Vaisesika philosophy or the explanation of the Vaisesika philosophy cannot be completed without the discussion of abhava or non-existence. According to some of the Vaisesika scholars, they said that abhava is an independent category or is an independent padartha, as like dravya, guna and so on and so forth. The reason they have given by stating that abhava also satisfies the 3 features. What are those? The first one is jnatva, avidheyatva and astitva. So these 3 features we find in case of abhava or padartha. Therefore, they claim that abhava is an independent padartha among other padarthas. Today we will discuss how Vaisesika scholars explain the concept of abhava and what they mean when they talk about abhava. For our general understanding, before going to the Vaisesika philosophy, let us have a common understanding what we mean by abhava. Abhava means something is empty, something is void, that is abhava. Suppose you say that there is no air in this room, you imply that there is no oxygen in this room because you are feeling suffocation in this room. So therefore, abhava means something is not there. If you say that there is no chair in this room, that means the chair that you are referring, that may exist in other room or in some other places. However, that particular chair does not exist in that particular time in that room, but we can identify the non-existence of chair in that room. Therefore, here non-existence become an astitva. It has its own identity, and further it can be knowable. We can know about it, we can think about it. How we can understand the concept non-existence of something in a particular place and in a particular time. Now further, avidheyatva, we can give a name to that. That particular chair which does not exist in this room may be available in that room or may be available in some other places. Therefore, according to Vaisesika philosophy, abhava is an independent category. Now I believe you might have a very common understanding what abhava means. Now let focus very clearly what Vaisesika said about abhava. Abhava for them is a non-existence, and it is the seventh category among other category of Vaisesika philosophy. As I said, it is added by Sivaditya and endorsed by many other Vaisesika thinkers by claiming that Abhava should not be understood as the negation of existence. No, non-existence for them also equally as an independent category. It has its own identity. We can understand this non-existence independently from others. An example they have given, if I say that there is no tree in front of John's house. Now, the non-existence of tree in front of John's house is understood by each and everyone. The negation over here stands as an existence for our understanding. What we have understood from this sentence is that there is a person living in a particular house, the person name is John, and in front of his house there is no tree. Henceforth, Abhava becomes an independent category among other categories. Further, they said that this category conveys that every experience has its counterpart in the external world. Every experience has its counterpart in the external world. If you say that God exists, many other thinkers, they believe that God does not exist. If one claims that there is neem tree exists, others equally claim that neem tree does not exist. So, therefore, the existence and non-existence depend on the spatio-temporal condition. Whenever one talks about that something exists, that means that thing which is exist, it exists by occupying a particular place in a particular time. Therefore, existence and non-existence depend on spatio-temporal conditions. We cannot say that something exists without occupying a particular place, without signifying a particular time. If you say that Alexander the Great existed in the past, then you say that in so and so time, in so and so kingdom. Therefore, we must understand the concept existence and non-existence in relation to the spatio-temporal world. It cannot be understood independent of spatio-temporal conditions. Vaisesika thinkers also accepted that the first 6 category which is mentioned by Kanada are positive in character. Why? Because if you say that dravya, that means substance, they refer to a substance which exists before the cognizer. There are also, they said, eternal substances, but further they said that eternal substances can be known by the help of the qualities and actions that they have in it. Further, they said about guna. As you know that guna cannot exist independently of substances. That means whenever they try to explain the things, it is in positive in nature. But the last category, which is known as abhava, mentioned by Sivaditya, said that it is a negative character. It is a negative feature of understanding the non-existence of a substance of having a particular time in a particular place. Therefore, they say that if we can understand that a chair exists in a particular room of having a particular time, we can also equally understand a chair or that particular chair does not exist in that particular room in a particular time. Therefore, they said categorically saying that this padartha abhava as a padartha category conveys that every experience has its counterpart in the external world. For example, when we see a particular place without a jar, we experience the absence of jar in that place. Similarly, when the jar is destroyed, there is the absence of that jar again. Now, there are two things they are claiming. We can judge a situation claiming that this object or a particular object does not exist in that place in a particular time. That non-existence we have understood. Now, further non-existence they are talking about, that is, they said that if there is some object or some substance exists for all of us, now that substance is destroyed or broken, then also we find the non-existence of that substance. However, though we find some pieces of that substance, yet the substance as it was found in its original form, that is lost. Henceforth, they said that there are abhava. In this way we can understand the concept of abhava. The first thing that we can know the abhava in relation to the spatio-temporal condition. The second is that when a particular substance is destroyed, we find the non-existence of substance. Now, in this context, other scholars from other schools, Buddhism, Advaita Vedantins and many other schools, even Mimamsika schools, they have asked a question: is it the case that Kanada did not aware of the concept of abhava? Whenever he talked about 6 category, it seems that he does not know or he did not aware of the concept of abhava. Many scholars refute this argument. They said that it is not so. Kanada was very much aware of the fact of abhava, and while establishing the argument stating that Kanada was aware of the fact of abhava, they said that Kanada also discussed about moksha. Moksha means liberation. Liberation means detached from worldly pain, detached from the physical pain and mental pain that each and everyone finds while living in this earth. If a person can understand the concept of detachment from something, a negation of pain, he or she must understand the concept, the negation of existence as well. Therefore, by referring to the concept, they said that Kanada was very much aware of the concept moksha or liberation, which implies the liberation of pain, the liberation of suffering. It is a negation of pain. Therefore, we cannot claim that he was not aware of the concept of abhava. He was very much aware of the concept of abhava, but maybe for him abhava is understood in the absence of existence, nothing more, or it is a negation of existence. So, therefore, they established that Kanada was also aware of the concept of abhava whenever he mentioned about the 6 categories. Further, abhava is of 2 kinds that we find: samsarga abhava, ananya abhava. Samsarga abhava talks about the relative non-existence, ananya abhava talks about the mutual non-existence. Now, broadly we find 2 kinds of non-existence. One is a relative non-existence, another is mutual non-existence. Now, let us discuss what is relative non-existence. If I say that x is related to y, z is related to b, so the relation that you can find out, some sort of relation we find between 2 elements. To have a relation, we require at least 2 elements, 2 components, 2 objects, 2 things, or anything at least 2 in numbers. Therefore, whenever we talk about relative non-existence, we must aware of the fact that it has a relation between 2 things. 2 things not necessarily may be different. Whenever I say that a table is different from chair, here table and chair are 2 different objects, but in case of relative existence, it may mean something more than that. If you say that x1 in the morning time and x1 in the evening time. These two are different. See, x in 6 am and x in 7 am. Because of the time gap, this x is different from x that we find in 6 am as well as 7 am. So, therefore, a particular object in relation to its time place also plays a relative character. Therefore, they said that we find relative non-existence, that is samsarga bhava, and further they said ananya bhava, that means mutual non-existence. So that a table is not a chair, a computer is not a glass of water, a camera is not an iron rod. So, therefore, two components separately we find here, and one cannot include other, one cannot include in other. So, they mutually exclude from each other. Now, let us focus what is relative non-existence according to Vaisesika philosophy. Samsarga abhava means the absence of something in something else. As I said that there are relative non-existence, something is absent in something. That is an ordinary understanding of the concept relative non-existence. They said that it is a relative to particular space and time. I said that x at 6 am is different from that same x in 7 am. Because of the time, x is different. Here we find. Now, the place, suppose x as an individual, as a being that we find in a particular place, say y, certainly will be different if the x will find in another place, say known as z. Therefore, the relative non-existence depends on time and space as well. Now, it is based on the spatio-temporal condition, as I said. All kinds of samsarga bhava can be expressed by a judgment of the general form x is not in P. Here you must understand that the expression x is not in P. Here we are talking about the absence of something in something. The relative non-existence, if we expressed in a symbolical form, in a logical form, it appears in this way: S is an object, is not in P, P is another object. So, P and S are related with each other, but however, we do not find S in P. That is a relative non-existence. Many people understood relative means opposite of absolute. Here we must understand the concept not in that form. So, let us, in the proper spirit, we must understand the way Vaisesika philosophy argues the concept relative non-existence. They say that something does not exist in something, that means they are related with each other, and however, we may not find some of the component of S. Therefore, we can express the logical form saying that S is not in P. Now, they said it is of three kinds. The relative non-existence we find in of three kinds. The relative non-existence that we are talking about is of three kinds in nature according to Vaisesika philosophy. And what are those? One is Pragbhava, the second one is Dhvangsa bhava, and the third one is Atyanta bhava. The first one, Pragbhava, it talks about antecedent non-existence. Dhvangsa bhava talks about posterior non-existence, and Atyanta bhava talks about absolute non-existence. What is antecedent non-existence? Now, let us have a common understanding. For example, say that a particular chair, before the creation of that particular chair, we find the absence of that chair, but in the same time we may find different other chairs of that same nature or the same kind maybe, but the particular chair before its creation, before its production, we may not find its existence in this earth. That is a antecedent non-existence. Then posterior of non-existence, The posteriori non-existence talks about that once an object is destroyed, we may find of its pieces, but the object as its such in its earlier form we may not find, and we do not find because it is broken. Therefore, we say that posteriori non-existence, a thing or a object exists before us, now it is broken, therefore, that objects never find further. After the destruction of that object, the object not remain as same. Therefore, we find the absence of that same object in the broken pieces. The third one talking about the absolute non-existence. That non-existence we find all the time, it is an eternal non-existence. For example, if I say a barren woman's child, you may say that I am contradicting myself. And here, if a woman is barren, she cannot biologically gives birth to a child. On the other hand, if a woman gives birth to a child, then she cannot be termed as a barren woman. Therefore, two things you can find. In one side, there is a woman who gives birth to a child. That woman cannot be treated as a barren woman. And on the other side, the woman who is barren cannot biologically gives birth to a child. Therefore, see, barren woman's child, this is we could say absolute non-existence. A barren woman cannot gives birth to a child. So, the child and barren woman, they are absolute non-existence. Another example, let's say I will give hare's horn. Hares cannot have a horn. Therefore, the horn in the hare, it is an absolute non-existence. It was in the past, it is in the present, and it will be in the future. So, here the non-existence we can understand. Further, they say that there are many kind of concepts that also we need to understand in that form. Say for example, dharma, karma, it is a non-existence. We cannot refer to a particular object. Now, let us discuss one after another what they mean by Pragbhava. Pragbhava, according to Vaisesika philosophy, it is the non-existence of a thing before its production. A jar was non-existence before it was produced. There might be other jars, but that particular jar did not exist before it was produced by the potter. Clearly said that let us take an example. Let us take an example of jar. Here Vaisesika philosophy categorically said that before the production of the jar we find the absence of that jar. In the same time, they claim that there may be other kinds of jar of that same sort will be available in this earth, but however, that particular jar which was not produced, here we find the absence of that jar, and once it is produced we find its existence. There will be no further absence in it. Therefore, they said that this kind of non-existence or absence has no beginning, but it has an end. Why it is so? Because before the production we may not know that whether that jar can be produced or not by the potter, but once it is produced we find its existence. That means there is an end in it. In this way we can understand the concept Pragbhava. Before the creation, before the production of the jar was not there. We find the absence of jar. Once it is produced, we find the existence of jar. Therefore, they said that it has no beginning, but certainly it has an end. Explaining further, they said that before the jar was produced, its absence existed, but its absence ends when it is produced. It is a very lucid way. Vaisesika philosophy argued the concept absence, that Pragbhava. They said that before the jar was produced, its absence existed, but its absence ends when it is produced. We never find further absence of that jar after its production. So, this is all about Pragbhava. Now, we can understand the concept absence of a particular substance before its production. Now, in the similar fashion, they said that once a substance is broken, we find the non-existence of that substance. That is called Dhvangsa Bhava. Dhvangsa Bhava means posteriori non-existence. Here they said that Dhvangsa Bhava is a non-existence or absence, states that destruction of existence is creation of non-existence. Now, must understand the concept. Destruction of existence is the creation of non-existence. Once something is destroyed, then we find the non-existence of it. Once something is destroyed, once something is broken, we may not find the same object in future, because that object is destroyed. That object is no more serves its purposes. Let us take the same example. It is a jar. A jar is made of, say, glass. Once the jar is broken, we find different pieces of glasses. But here, after it is broken, the jar we may not find. The jar we cannot find. The same jar won't available at all because it is broken. That is why after its destruction, the creation of absence we find in it. In the same fashion, Dhvangsa Bhava clearly stated that destruction of existence is creation of non-existence. It is the absence of the non-existence of a thing after its destruction. Continuing further, the same example I have written here. A jar becomes non-existent when it is broken or destroyed. The broken pieces may remain exist, but not the same jar after its destruction. This kind of absence has a beginning, but not an end. See, in Pragbhava, they said that this kind of absence has no beginning, but an end, because there is an absence we find before the production of the jar in case of Pragbhava. Therefore, they said that it has no beginning, but has an end. But in case of Dhvangsa Bhava, since the object exists before us, since the object occupies a particular place in a particular time, we say that it has a beginning, but it has no end, because after its destruction we find the absence of it. Therefore, they said that this kind of absence has a beginning, but not an end. Has a beginning means we know the object, we refer to the object, that the object serves some purposes. It has a beginning, it does not have any end, because after destruction that object not remain as same that we had seen before its destruction. Therefore, two kind of abhavas that you can see, Pragbhava in one hand and Dhvangsa Bhava on the other hand, and both are relative non-existence. Both are talking about relative non-existence. In relation to the second one, there are two other points that I need to inform you. The absence of the jar starts when it is destroyed, and it became non-existence after its destruction. It is self-explanatory. After its destruction, we cannot get the same jar, but we may get other jars of same kind. Now, moving to the third one, Atyanta Abhava. It is the absolute non-existence between two things for all time. The third one also talks about the relative non-existence. Here they are saying that the two things, or the absence over here, we find between two things for all the time. It is an eternal. Therefore, they said it is the absolute non-existence between two things for all the time. these two components cannot put together. The absence over here we find all the time, both in past, present and future. They said that this is an eternal. Hare's horn, I have also discussed this concept to you. Hare's horn is the non-existence in the past, present and future. Hares cannot have horn. If some animals have a horn, then that animal cannot be called as hare. Therefore, the hare in the one hand and other side its horn. Here we find the two objects are having the absolute non-existence. That is what they said, that any animals of having horn cannot be called as hare, and if hare is an animal, that animal cannot have horn. Therefore, the non-existence of horn in hare we find both in past, present and future. Therefore, it is an eternal non-existence, eternal absolute non-existence. Thus, I have said here, hare's horn is the non-existence in the past, present and future. This kind of absence has neither a beginning nor an end. If we say that something has a beginning, that means that something must exist. Like in Dhangsa Bhava, we said that it has beginning, it has a beginning, but it does not have an end. In case of Pragbhava, we said that it does not have a beginning, but it has an end. But here, since it is the absolute non-existent, we said that it has neither beginning nor an end. It is absolute and eternal absence. It also implies such absence like a barren woman's child. Now, I hope you have understood the relative non-existence stated by Vaisesika philosophy. Now, the second kind of non-existence that we are going to discuss, that is ananya bhava or mutual non-existence. What is mutual non-existence? Mutual non-existence talks about, or mutual non-existence expresses about two things are having mutually absent from each other. For example, if I say that a table is not a chair, we cannot say that a table is a chair, because the chair cannot find in table, neither the table can find in chair. Therefore, they said it means one thing is not another thing. A table is not a chair. Mutual non-existence. It is expressed in a judgment form like S is not P. Now, remember what I said in relative non-existence. I said that relative non-existence are of three types: Pragbhava, Dhangsa Bhava and Atyanta Bhava. In these three forms, we find these two objects are related with each other in some non-existence form. Therefore, the symbolical expression of samsarga bhava or relative existence is expressed in this way: S is not in P, but here if you find that S is not P, S and P are two different objects, maybe in the same object, but they are not equal. You said that S is not P or P is not S, a table is not a chair and a chair is not a table. Therefore, they said that it underlies the difference of one thing from another thing. When one thing is different from another thing, they mutually exclude with each other. When one thing is different from another thing, when a table is different from chair, they are mutually exclude with each other. Now, I believe that you have understood the concept, what is mutual non-existence. You say that a tree is not a snake is not a rope is not an umbrella, so on and so forth. Mutually exclude with each other. On the other hand, if you talk about samsarga bhava, here is saying that things are absent in relative in character. It depends on spatio-temporal condition, but here in case of mutual non-existence, it does not require any spatio-temporal condition. You say that table, wherever it exists, whatever its form may be, certainly it is different from a chair. Thus they said, when one thing is different from another thing, they mutually exclude with each other. Negating one from the other is called mutual non-existence. Further explaining, they said that negating one from the other is called mutual non-existence. An example, they said, a table is not a chair, it has a neither beginning nor an end, therefore it is eternal. What is commonality we find between Atyanta Bhava and Anyanya Bhava is that both are eternal in character. The absence that we find in both the cases, Ananya Bhava and Atyanta Bhava. Atyanta Bhava is a part or a kind of Samsarga Bhava, and Ananya Bhava is a different kind of Bhava. In both the cases, we find one commonality, that is the eternal absence in both objects. In case of Atyanta Bhava, we find that the two objects cannot find together in a particular place, like a barren woman child, a hare's horn. But here in case of mutual non-existence, we find the absence, that x is different from y is different from z in this form. Therefore, two symbolical forms we find here while explaining the concept absence or non-existence. One is Samsarga Bhava or relative existence, where the symbolical form is S is not in P. But in case of Ananya Bhava, which talks about mutual non-existence, here the symbolical expression we find S is not P. Thus, it is also eternal in character. Which one? Is a mutual non-existence. Now, continuing further, there are few questions people argued to Vaisesika philosophy. They said that what is the pramana we need to employ to understand the concept of bhava. In the other words, what is the pramana through which one can understand the non-existence of existence in a particular place? This question raised. Now, Kumarila Bhatta and Advaita Vedantins, they said that the absence of cognition is to be understood by the help of Anupalabdhi. Anupalabdhi is a pramana. Here, Kumarila Bhatta and Advaita Vedanta, they talk about that absence of the cognition is known through the method of Anupalabdhi. What is Anupalabdhi? As you know that Nyaya Vaisesika talks about four pramanas, that is perception, inference, comparison and verbal testimony. But in Mimamsika's philosophy, they have added two more pramanas. One is Anupalabdhi, and the second one is orthopathy postulation. We will discuss about these two in detail whenever we discuss Mimamsa philosophy or the epistemology of Mimamsa philosophy. But for the present purpose, we must elaborate the concept Anupalabdhi here. Advaita Vedantins is known as Uttara Mimamsa and Purva Mimamsa is known as Mimamsa. This both Mimamsikas agreed that the absence of cognition is to be known by the help of Anupalabdhi. Anupalabdhi means something that is absent. That absence, the concept of the absence is to be understood in relation to a particular object which may find in other places. For example, if I say that there is no pen on the table, that means I know that there is some object known as pen and it exists elsewhere. Therefore, the absence of that same pen we find on the table, and this absence cannot be reduced to any other pramanas according to Mimamsa philosophy, because here it cannot be perceived, because once we say that the absence of that pen on the table, we cannot see that there is no pen in this table. What we see is an empty space. We cannot see the cognition of absence of that pen, neither it can be inferred. For having an inference, we need a Vyapti relation, but here to cognize the absence of a particular object on a particular place in a particular time, all the times we may not find a Vyapta relation. Therefore, according to Mimamsas, the absence of cognition can be identified or recognized by the help of the pramana anupalabdhi. So, this is stated by Purva Mimamsa and Advaita Vedantis. Now, some other scholar in Mimamsika, they said that the absence of the cognition can also be recognized by the help of orthopathy postulation. What is orthopathy postulation? That means there is a particular fact presented before the cognizer, and the particular fact cannot sustain itself because of many other conditions. Therefore, the cognizer has to postulate another fact which substitute to that fact for its existence. An example, let I will give, say Devadatta is a person who is fed by fasting in the daytime. Now, I said Devadatta is a person is fed by fasting in the daytime. So, if a person is fasting, cannot be fed, cannot be a fat man, and a fat man cannot be remain as a fat man until unless he is not eating so much food. Here we find there are two counter factors. A person is a fat but fasting in the daytime. Now, to understand the concept, how can a person be a fat in the same time fasting in the daytime? So, there is another assumption that here we create. Here the cognizer asserts a different fact in relation to that fact for establishing the concept or the fact that some person is fat by fasting in the daytime. Here the cognizer, what he or she postulates is that Devadatta is a person may not be eating in the daytime, but certainly eating in the night time heavy foods, and because of that he remains fat. Here the absence of the fact is postulated or is assumed by the cognizer. So, therefore, the negation of the fact on a particular place can be understood in relation to its existence in some other places. That means, if I say that there is no pen on my table, that concept can be understood in relation to saying that that pen may be existed some other places. So, that pen may be existed in my drawer, in my computer drawer. Therefore, now coming back, that after listening the explanation, after understanding the explanation of Vaisesika system, that how abhava can be considered as an independent category, there is a question raised by other schools, said that what is the pramana through which one can understand the non-existence of existence in a particular place. Responding to this question, Kumarila Bhatta belongs to Assam. He is a scholar from Assam. He and Advaita Vedantins, they said that the absence of the cognition is known through by the help of a pramana known as anupalabdhi. Now, further some other thinkers from Mimamsikas, they said that it is due to the orthopathy postulation, which means contradiction of facts presented to us. And what is contradiction of fact? That Devadatta is a fat man in the same time fasting in the daytime. These are both contradiction in terms. And how this contradiction can be resolved? By assuming, by postulating a different fact in relation to that fact. Then only that fact, that the fact that is presented before us in a contradiction form won't remain as a contradiction. It will assert some fact positively. It will establish itself. In this way, they say that by the help of orthopathy postulation and by the help of anupalabdhi, we can able to explain the concept absence or the concept of non-existence. Further, Nayaka said non-existence is a matter of perception. And what kind of perception? It is not an ordinary perception, as we perceive table, chair, tree, leaves, color, so on and so forth. He said that this perception is a special kind of perception. It is a matter of qualified perception which is known through specific sense object contact termed as Vishesha Visheshana Bhava. According to Nyaya Vaisesika, the absence can be cognized through Vishesha Visheshana Abhava. What is Vishesha? Vishesha talks about the particularity, and to understand the qualification of that Abhava in a particular place helps us to cognize a non-existence of an object on a particular place. I repeat, according to Nyaya Vaisesika, it is because of the Vishesha Visheshana Abhava we could be able to cognize the absence of an object on a particular place in a particular time. And what is Vishesha Visheshana Abhava for them? They said that Vishesha stands for particularity. That means to understand the particular absence on a particular place of having a particular type, it is a qualified perception of that object which may present in some other place in some other form. I hope you have understood. It is not that so critical. Vishesha Visheshana Abhava talks about that the absence of a particular substance on a particular time in a particular place may be qualified by its existence, which is available in some other places of having in a particular time. So, in this way we can understand a absence of a particular object, and therefore, since we can cognize the absence of a particular object of having its own identity, we can claim that Abhava is an independent category. Now, moving further, they also talks about the creation of the universe. While talking about the creation of the universe, they said that all composite objects that we find in this earth, chair, table, tree, so on and so forth, both living and non-living creatures, are created because of the atoms, and there are 4 atoms responsible for creation of the different objects in this earth. These are known as earth, water, air and fire. Further, they said that there are also many eternal substances exist, and they are beyond creation and destruction. They never come under the purview of creation and destruction. They are eternal. Their views regarding creation of the world is known as atomism, because every object that we see in this earth are created by atoms. And further, they said that atoms cannot move automatically. There will be some person responsible for moving the atom and mixing up the atoms in a different proportionate, because we find different objects in this earth, and different objects because of the different proportionate of atoms in it. And who is that person who really moves that atom to mix up in a different proportionate? In that context, they said that it is Ishwara or God, who is Almighty, is responsible for moving the atoms and mixing up atoms in a different proportionate, so that they could able to generate different products in this earth. Therefore, they said that the Vaisesika atomism is spiritual. Why is it spiritual? Because for them God is the guiding principle controlling the motion of atoms. Creation and destruction of the universe takes place in agreement with the wishes of God. They said that if there is no supernatural being, the atom cannot move automatically. So, therefore, we find that the supernatural being who really moves the atoms and make the atoms mix up in a different proportionate, and therefore, we get different objects in this earth. And the last, they said that it is the Maheshwara instead of Brahma, Vishnu or anything. They said that it is a Maheshwara with a particular name, is the ruler of the entire universe. So, it is the Maheshwara who really creates the universe, who really functions the universe, and who is responsible even for the destruction of the objects in this universe. I hope you have understood now the complete explanation of Vaisesika Padarthas and the issues they raised in their philosophy. Thank you.